Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from London. I'm Ollie Barrett and these are the headlines. The Kremlin says Russia will formally annex 4 Ukrainian regions after referendums the West says were shams. European Union leaders meet to discuss sabotage on the Nord Stream gas pipelines as Swedish Coast Guards detect a 4th leak. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss defends her tax-cutting policy despite it contributing to market turmoil and a Bank of England intervention to prevent what it called material risk to the economy. Germany's leading economic institute says its economy will contract in 2023 as inflation continues to rise on the back of soaring energy prices. US Vice President Kamala Harris tours South Korea's heavily fortified border with the nuclear-armed North and denounces Pyongyang's brutal dictatorship. The Kremlin says it will annex 4 Ukrainian regions on Friday after what Ukraine and the West say were sham referendums. Russia will claim control of Donetsk and Lugansk and parts of Zaporizhia and Kherson. The areas are home to up to 4 million people in total and make up around 15% of Ukraine's territory. Ukraine and much of the international community say the votes were illegal and not free or fair, and already say they won't accept any kind of annexation from Russia. And we can go live now to Rosie Burchard, who's joining me from Brussels, where European Union leaders are gathering today. Rosie, what do we expect to hear from them?
Well, this is a surprise to no one here in Brussels. This is seen by many as a page straight out of the Russian playbook. They've seen similar actions over the past years, for example, with the annexation of Crimea. That, however, has not stopped European Union officials from reacting with dismay. European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen says this is nothing more than an attempt to grab land. She says that these referendums are a sham, and the EU has responded by coming forward with new proposals for sanctions to tighten the screws on the Kremlin's ability to finance this war in Ukraine. Now, those sanctions proposals include a ban on EU citizens sitting on governing bodies of any Russian state-owned companies and tightening export bans, particularly on technology exports from the European Union into Russia. And that is an attempt to make sure Russia cannot modernise its military equipment in a bid to, again, try and reduce Russia's capacity on the battlefield. We've also heard from NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg, who says that NATO is fully behind Ukraine's sovereignty, and he says simply, these lands are Ukraine. But Ollie, there is a sense of déjà vu here. As I mentioned, the EU has seen this before with the annexation of Crimea, and at that time the European Union similarly responded with sanctions. The fact that this is happening again, I suppose, raises some questions about the effectiveness of that response. But the European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen has said she is determined to make Russia pay for this escalation.
And Rosie, what about member states' views on all of this? Not entirely united on the next steps?
think there's a fair degree of unity when it comes to the view towards these referendums, towards these votes and annexations. They will be universally condemned. Where there is disagreement, Ollie, is when it comes to this particular question of sanctions. Now, we've had so far a fair degree of unity just until now. Over the last few months, the EU has, of course, imposed successive rounds of sanctions on Moscow. They've sanctioned imports of Russian coal, sanctioned imports of Russian oil, and hundreds of Russian officials and business people. But now there is certainly divergence, and that is not least because Europe is embroiled in an energy crisis, and of course households and businesses are really feeling the fallout more and more of that ongoing Russian war in Ukraine. Now, the member state which is most at odds with others, and certainly most publicly at odds, is Hungary. Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, has questioned the whole idea of sanctions, and I should say, Ollie, that sanctions are, within European Union law, required to have unanimous backing from all member states to move forward. And Viktor Orban, that Hungarian Prime Minister, is now threatening to really derail the process moving forward, moving towards these next round of sanctions. And some say that's why what the European Commission has recently put on the table in response to this latest referendums is something which was not expected. So these technology export bans that I mentioned, banning EU citizens from sitting on boards, well, those are not particularly contentious. What would be more contentious is further sanctions on energy imports, for example, touching imports of Russian gas. So far, that has remained untouched because there is simply no agreement among EU member states on how to proceed there. While we have the Baltics, for example, saying they would like a full embargo on all Russian oil and gas, well, that's something that Hungary would be entirely opposed to. And also countries like Germany, which are still reliant in some ways on Russia for their energy imports, would also be pretty reticent about that moving forward. So some debates still to be had here within this European Union.
Thank you, Rosie. Sweden's Coast Guard has discovered a fourth gas leak in the damaged Nord Stream pipelines. The unexplained as yet leaks are in Sweden's and Denmark's exclusive economic zones. The pipelines carry gas from Russia to Europe through the Baltic Sea. The Kremlin says it suspects a foreign state's involvement. The West has blamed the disruption on sabotage. Finland says it will watch its waters very closely after the leak. Denmark has called the attack on the pipelines intentional. Russia and European partners spent billions of dollars in building them, but they've been out of action after Russia slashed gas deliveries following Western sanctions. UK Prime Minister Liz Truss has broken a silence held since her government unveiled a so-called mini-budget that contributed to market turmoil. She's given a series of BBC local radio interviews defending her decision to cut taxes and increase borrowing. She says her tax cuts and energy support plan will get the economy moving and help deal with inflation. She says the government is working closely now with the Bank of England. On Wednesday, the bank had to intervene in the economy to avoid pension funds going under, saying that there was a material risk to stability. Opposition leaders are demanding Liz Truss recalls Parliament over the crisis. For more on this, our correspondent Alex Isett reports.
The financial market in turmoil and many wondering what will happen to their money, the Prime Minister Liz Truss seems quite relaxed on the whole thing. Speaking to the BBC, Truss insisted she had the right plan to repair Britain's economy for the long term, which includes those massive cutting of taxes and increasing borrowing by billions. But she did clarify that conditions would not improve overnight. Now, her comments come after a week in which the pound slumped to its lowest in a decade against the dollar. Mortgage costs and their availability slumped, and the Bank of England was forced to pump in around £45 billion into the bond market to protect millions of pensions, with real fears that the Bank of England will raise interest rates even further. A number of lenders have pulled hundreds of mortgage products, and there is a rumour that we will see a house price crash on the horizon. Although for those with mortgages who've borrowed way above their means, this situation is a nightmare, with costs quickly rising and many mortgage deals taken off the market. But there are many who welcome a house price crash. as for decades the cost of a property has gone above affordability. Yet the whispers are that this halt to house prices that we will see will only be temporary, and that they will continue on the upward trajectory, which will only benefit those who can afford it, and possibly even more overseas buyers, making it impossible for some to get on the housing market in their lifetime. For now, it seems everybody is spooked, including members of the Tory party, who are questioning the timing of these cuts and whether Truss and her cabinet are right for the job. But despite this, Downing Street and the Treasury remain defiant, saying there is no prospect of change in the approach. This is Alex Isaac for WION. World is One.
Well, Jonathan Liss from the think tank British Influence joins me live now. Jonathan, what did you make of those interviews from Liz Truss? No sign I could detect that she's backing away from her economic plans.
That's right. This was a simple doubling down of her ideology, really, her game playing, you might say. Normally, when you're a politician and you try something and it fails, you reverse course. Liz Truss is not like that. She is determined to see this through. Even though all the lights are flashing red on the dashboard, she's carrying on pulling those levers, which could leave Britain in a much worse crisis.
Jonathan, why do you think markets were so spooked, given that Liz Truss had been signalling exactly this type of economic programme throughout her leadership campaign?
Because the market seemed to think, and I think it's justifiable, that the government had no idea what it was doing. First of all, that it was privileging tax cuts for the richest, which the IMF pointed out in their extraordinary statement about it. Second of all, that the government was effectively committing to permanent borrowing for day-to-day spending to fund those tax cuts. And I suppose that the Bank of England and the government are moving in different directions. The government is trying to accelerate the economy, adding to inflation when inflation is already 10%, whereas the Bank of England is raising interest rates to try and break the economy, put a brake on it rather than break it. And so they're moving in different directions, and the government, the markets can see that no one really has a handle on the British economy, least of all the government, which is kind of playing ideological games completely divorced from reality. And that's why if the market sense panic, they are going to panic as well. And they're going to sort of take fright and leave and take sterling out with them. And that seems to be what's happening.
And Jonathan, just picking up on that idea of yours that normally politicians would U-turn if their plans were received like this, how can Liz Truss do that given the damage it would do to her authority? And as I say, the fact that she's been trailing exactly this type of plan for so long now, would it not be a blow to her credibility that would be almost impossible to recover from?
She's now in a lose-lose situation because, as you say, if she U-turns, then she'll completely destroy her authority and her party will get rid of her. But if she carries on with this course, sort of ploughing the Titanic straight into the iceberg, then the pound is going to plunge further, interest rates are going to soar higher, mortgage repayments are going to add several £100 a month, and it's homeowners who are one of the Tories' biggest voter bases, and her party will still get rid of her. So it seems very unlikely that Liz Truss can regain her authority or stem the poll losses which the Tories are currently facing.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's Jonathan Liss from the think tank British Influence. Well, staying in the UK, railway unions are urging residents to avoid trains across Britain this Saturday if they can. The advisory comes ahead of a major planned strike. There may be no trains at all at times between London and major cities including Birmingham, Edinburgh, Manchester, Liverpool, Newcastle, Brighton and Norwich. The latest timetable suggests just 11% of trains being functional. compared to the normal schedule. Drivers at 14 operators are due on strike. There are more strike dates due in October as well. Union members are taking action over pay and conditions. Next to Myanmar, where a court has sentenced an Australian economist to 3 years in prison. The courts also handed another conviction to ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Both have been detained since a coup in February last year. Australian economist Sean Turnell was an advisor to her government.
Myanmar's deposed leader and Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi and her economic advisor Sean Turnell were each given 3-year jail terms on Thursday for allegedly violating an Official Secrets Act. That's according to a source speaking to Reuters anonymously. They apparently won't be subject to hard labour. Thursday's sentencing took place in a closed court in the capital, Naypyidaw. Suu Kyi and Turnell, an Australian national, had pleaded not guilty to breaching the Colonial Era Act. In military-controlled Myanmar, it's an offence punishable by up to 14 years in prison. The defendant's exact offence under the Official Secrets Act remains unclear, though a source previously said Turnell's offence relates to an allegation that he had government documents. Myanmar saw large protests after the junta overthrew Suu Kyi's democratically elected government in a coup last year. A veteran opponent of military rule, she faces more than 17 years in jail in separate cases mostly linked to graft. A junta spokesperson did not answer calls for a comment on Thursday, though the junta insists courts in Myanmar are independent and those arrested are receiving due process.
China and Japan have been marking 50 years of diplomatic ties. China's ambassador to Japan says the two nations are at a new start and an important turning point. The Chinese envoy and Japan's foreign minister have attended a ceremony in Tokyo celebrating the 1972 normalization of relations.
The Japan-China relationship went through some wind and rain, but still a long road awaits us. The intention of us holding this 50th anniversary ceremony is to promise for a new start on the ground that our ancestors built.
The relationship between Japan and China has many potentials, but also a great number of challenges and obstacles. Both Japan and China share a strong responsibility for the peace and prosperity of the region and the world. Now it is expected for us to greatly rely on the knowledge and experience we have forged in the past 50 years.
50 years ago, China and Japan signed a joint communiqué in which they agreed to establish relations of perpetual peace and friendship, but recent ties have been characterized by tensions over a series of issues. In Guinea, a long-awaited trial has started of 11 men, including former military ruler Moussa Dadis Camara. They're accused over a 2009 stadium massacre and mass rape by Guinean security forces.
A trial began in Guinea on Wednesday in the case of 11 men linked to a stadium massacre in 2009. Prosecutors say more than 150 people were killed and at least a dozen women raped by security forces. Charges included murder, rape, torture, and theft. Former military ruler Moussa Dadis Camara is among the accused. Court was adjourned until next week, but International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan touted the start of the long-awaited trial.
Some doubted this day would come. Justice is not cosmetic. It's not a cosmetic exercise.
13 years ago, security forces fired tear gas and charged a stadium where tens of thousands of pro-democracy demonstrators were protesting, pressuring Camara not to run for president. People were shot, stabbed, beaten, and crushed. Camara has denied responsibility in the case and blames errant soldiers for the rampage. Survivors and family members say they hope the trial brings justice. As Mao Diallo said, her son was killed right in front of her.
It was about time for this to happen. 13 years. 13 years of fighting, of interviews to journalists, of traveling. It was really heavy, but it was necessary to arrive today at this date of the 28th of September 2022, thanks to the current authorities who really had the courage and the commitment to open this trial today.
Court is set to resume in early October.
Sports people of Iran are showing solidarity with protests that have been sweeping through the country. There's been unrest in Iran since the death of Mahsa Amini in the custody of the morality police. Iran's Football World Cup-bound team has dared the establishment with a public act of defiance. The entire squad covered their official jerseys with black jackets ahead of a friendly with Senegal in Austria. There were protests outside the stadium as well, with the Iranian Football Association ordering the match be played behind closed doors. In a now-deleted Instagram post, influential forward Sardar Azmoun threw his weight behind the protests. A number of his teammates have blacked out their profile pictures on social media, and one has posted a video of him shaving his head. The Ukraine war has led to effects across the globe, including in Mexico. A shortage of corn supplies has led to a spike in the prices of traditional tacos and other popular street foods. I'll leave you with that story. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.
Tortillas are a staple in Mexican food, the most basic component of a Mexican meal. But the price of this popular and beloved flatbread has shot up. Corn, which is an essential ingredient, is in short supply due to the supply disruptions caused by the war in Ukraine.
From one minute to another, the product prices rise. Everything is more expensive. In the last semester, the electricity bill increased, the water bill increased too, and that affects the client's pockets because the basic products have increased. And therefore, when people come to buy tortillas, they ask why in such a short period of time the price is escalated that much.
Energy prices are through the roof, supplies of corn are inadequate, and climate change-driven drought in many parts of the world has only amplified food insecurity. All of these factors combined have rendered some of the most basic street foods unaffordable in Mexico. Mexicans are struggling to pay for even the most basic items. So far this year, the price of tortillas has shot up 3 times already. In Mexico City, the price of one tortilla went up from 18 pesos in 2021 to now 22 pesos. The jump is even higher in some other cities.
The fact that Mexicans can't have the tortilla they need on their dining tables, that is the most terrible thing. For them, when it comes to feeding themselves, if they lack the money to buy tortillas, well, they don't have money for other things, for instance, services. And in terms of the dough and tortilla industry, you may think that we are making more money, but no, because people do not have more money, tortilla consumption is decreasing.
From tacos to cheese quesos, the price rise is a sign of the turbulent times, and there seems to be no end in sight. Food staples like tortillas have become a luxury that most Mexicans can no longer afford. Bureau Report WION World is One.
There are many other